Welcome to another episode of Branching Out with Sierra. Today we're on episode 19, Boundaries, a Leadership Superpower. Today is going to be a solo episode, so just me today, talking a little bit about my personal journey of learning about boundaries. I used to say yes to every opportunity, whether it was work-related or a favor for a friend, and eventually I realized I wasn't being as productive as I could be, was constantly tired because I didn't have time for myself. And that's just one example of a time that I knew I needed to start boundaries. So, as we know, this can be very important for leaders. Boundaries are crucial for leaders because they're not only looking out for their own time, but they're also setting the example for their teams. So when a leader sets boundaries, they're showing others how to prioritize themselves, their well-being, their time, and it eventually becomes a ripple effect, hopefully creating a healthier work environment for everyone. So that is why I bring this up today. I really want to spend some time talking about how boundaries show up in our lives in different ways. And it's not just work-life balance that we're talking about when we're considering boundaries, but it really applies to all areas of life. So before we dig in, I think it's important that we define what a boundary even is. What do we mean by boundaries for today's episode? So when I think of boundaries, I'm thinking of the guidelines that you can use to protect your time, protect the amount of energy you have, and even your emotional well-being. You can have physical boundaries, which might actually be personal space. You can have emotional boundaries where you're protecting your feelings, or as I mentioned, time, which comes down to how you prioritize spending your time. So as we talk about these different types of boundaries today, we're going to talk about some examples of each, maybe some tips and strategies to better implement those boundaries, and hopefully give you guys a challenge so you can turn around and implement something that you hear in today's episode. Keep in mind as I'm sharing today that this will forever be a work in progress. I joked in my previous episode with Erica that I have always struggled with boundaries. I have come a long way, but it is something that has come up. I was joking ever since I started seeing a therapist after high school. I'm pretty sure every single visit, the word boundaries has been brought up at some point. I think it is going to be me just being transparent about the struggles I even have with them, not saying that I am great at this today, but it does remain top of mind and I do have to have them reinforced regularly. So just keep that in mind. I'm not speaking from a place where I feel like I have mastered setting and holding boundaries, but I think a lot of people listening to this can probably relate that this might be a difficult area. I know Erica had shared there's a book entitled Boundaries. And we can definitely put that link in the show notes so you guys can check that out too. She actually shared a little bit about that in episode 18, so you can go back and check that out as well. So again, when we're talking about physical boundaries, we could be talking about personal space, like literally your physical space in which you're in. Physical could also mean your health, your physical needs. So when we think of that, an example of that might be really considering the space, the environment in which you need to be able to focus and get your work done. I actually had a client that I was speaking with about this just in the past couple of weeks who had said that, the way that her office is set up, she feels like there isn't really a space that she can go to, that she's not overhearing all of the other office conversations and then can't really resist the urge to either go get involved in the conversation or give them the solution to the problem that they're facing, just really can't kind of keep herself out of those conversations and focused in on the work that she's doing. So it was actually a really simple fix. We talked about getting a noise machine and setting a noise machine there right at the door so that she is able to shut the door, turn that on, and really focus in on her stuff. So that is an example of your actual needs of the space in which you're working or living so that you are able to get your work done. We're also going to be talking about emotional boundaries, so really protecting your own feelings of overwhelm from other people's emotions. This one I find to be very challenging as a coach because if you think about every coaching session that I have, a lot of leadership development, you have to really get down to who you are as a person, get to know yourself, your triggers, strengths, opportunities for growth. And a lot of times my clients are opening up about things going on in their personal lives. I've had a lot recently experiencing loss. I have to really set some emotional boundaries so that I do not absorb everything that my clients are going through. Not only absorb it myself and take it on and feel like, I have to carry it around with me and solve all these problems, but also meaning that I don't want to carry what I've experienced from one session into the next session. So that means that I have to actually set my schedule in a way that I have 15-minute gaps between my sessions. Back at the very beginning of my business, I used to do an hour session, and then I would literally jump right into the next session. And over time, I slowly shifted the schedule to where I have 45-minute sessions, typically with a 15-minute gap in between, which allows me the opportunity to get up, move around, and kind of decompress from whatever I just experienced and took on from that call, release that, and really start fresh for the next one. It also comes down to limiting your exposure to people who might bring you negative energy. And I know I've mentioned before in previous episodes about how I reached a point in my life where I had to really consider those around me, and if there were people that were lifting me up and rooting me on and wanting to be there to support me and encourage me, or if there were people who I felt like I was always pouring into them and it was very draining and really left me with a lot of negative energy walking away. So that's what we're talking about for emotional boundaries for the purposes of today's episode. And then for time, when we're talking about boundaries in time, that comes down to not just work-life balance, but really prioritizing your time for the things you deem to be essential, so urgent and important, but also things that align with what you value in life. So we'll get there in just a few minutes, but you really want to focus on blocking out time for getting things done without being interrupted, making sure you're building in time for personal reflection and really able to see how things are going and adjust as necessary. So again, we're talking about physical, emotional, and boundaries with time today. Before we dig into those, I want to talk about a few misconceptions that I often hear about boundaries. And when I say I often hear them, I admit to also having believed them for a long period of time. And the first one is that setting boundaries is selfish. So I know that when I first started putting boundaries in place, people did not know how to react to that. You take someone who, when we talk about DISC, I had mentioned before, I was very high SC, so I was a peacemaker, kind of walking on eggshells all the time, just aiming to please everyone else, no matter what that meant for myself. And so when I started setting boundaries, people were seeing a major shift in me. And it definitely could have appeared that I was being selfish because for the first time I was putting my needs before any others. I was really protecting myself. And so the reality of this is it's not selfish. It's about protecting yourself so you can show up as your best self for others. And I, think back to, again, when I was an educator and I had to do the things that were necessary in taking care of myself so that when I showed up each day for school, that I could give those students everything that I had. So that required some boundaries in place to protect my time, my emotions, physically, mentally, so that I could show up for my kids. So I think it's important to reframe boundaries as not selfish, but acts of self-respect. so not selfishness. Because when you are well rested and you're able to focus, you are able to be more effective. You can help others. You can really fulfill your purpose much better than if you do not have boundaries and you let others take advantage of your kindness. So that's myth one. Setting boundaries is actually not selfish. Another one is that boundaries are only about work-life balance. That's certainly not true. Boundaries come up all over the place, and the three things that I'm talking about today with the emotional piece, the physical boundaries, and time, there's even more than that. That's just what I'm choosing to focus in on today. But boundaries truly apply to every single relationship that you have. So it's your family, it's friends, your colleagues. You can even have boundaries with yourself, which might sound weird, but all of these are necessary in order to protect your physical, mental, and emotional health. So it's not just work-life balance that we're talking about. When I say setting boundaries with yourself, I know this is one that I tend to struggle with, and people make jokes about it, but I did not want to get sucked into the doom scrolling that everybody talks about. So I did set timers for social media apps on my phone, which after my time is up, it pops up with a warning that it's going to kick me out. And I can choose to hit the button to ignore it. Ignore it for additional 5 minutes, ignore it for 15 minutes, or ignore it for the rest of the day. And it's interesting because I can fall back into the habit of just hitting ignore and continuing the behavior. And I really have to focus in on, okay, I'm going to set this boundary for myself, because if I sit here and scroll and waste my time on technology, then I'm not going to be able to get the other things done. I often feel like if I focus too much on my work, my house becomes atrocious. Or if I focus too much on my house, then for that whole week, I feel like I'm behind at work and playing catch up, and it's really hard to find that balance. And certainly sitting and scrolling on social media isn't going to help me to accomplish either of those things. So I do allow myself time here and there to unwind, but I try to do it without screens if I can. Sometimes I can't pull away, and I will literally text right up to the moment that I put my phone down and put it on Do Not Disturb and close my eyes. And I'm usually so exhausted that I will fall right to sleep, even if I had just been looking at a screen. But I try and start my day the opposite way and create boundaries where I don't allow myself to immediately look at the screen at the beginning of the day. I prefer to do reading, something quiet, and ease into the day and not immediately look. So again, that is when we're talking about boundaries for yourself. It could be for your own behaviors, your own good or poor habits that you feel like you need to start putting some boundaries in place. So again, those are just a couple of myths about boundaries. Just a reminder, they're not selfish. We're going to reframe that as an act of self-respect. It is not just about work-life balance. This really applies to all areas of life, and especially, as I mentioned at the beginning, to being an effective leader, because again, you are modeling this for everyone else around you, and you could set up your whole team for success in a really healthy environment by kind of modeling these boundaries to begin with. And then finally, I mentioned there the technology use as a personal boundary just for yourself. Okay, so let's talk about how we know a boundary might be needed. Like, what are some signs that you could be looking for that it's time to consider if I need more boundaries in place? And I know that I've seen all of these in my life before. So that feeling of overwhelm, where you have so much on your plate, you don't even know where to begin. The moment you check something off, something else jumps back onto the list, or two things jump onto the list. So you are just feeling like you're not making any progress. I have some clients say they feel like they're on that hamster wheel. So they're constantly feeling overwhelmed. or just constantly feeling exhausted. And I'm not talking about the exhaustion that might be related to some sort of illness. I know I talk about my fatigue with my Lyme disease, but I'm talking about like pure exhaustion where you're mentally exhausted and you feel like you can't even process information properly. I know that, I know the time of day this happens for me, and that I have to take action at those moments to really turn it around for myself so that I can get anything else done during the day. So I think when you start to feel overwhelmed or the sense of being exhausted, you are probably taking on too much. You haven't been protecting your time. You haven't been protecting your energy. So you need to be on the lookout for those signs of burnout early. It's terrible when I see someone that is so passionate about their profession, whatever they've chosen to do, but they're experiencing burnout because they've done it too much for too long and they haven't put boundaries in place. They might even just start, not even wanting to go to work. The other thing is you might start feeling resentment for other people. And that can be experienced because maybe you have maybe let them take advantage of you for too long. And so now you're starting to blame them. Just pay attention to those things. Those are definitely signs that you need to revisit boundaries. It usually comes down to difficulty saying no, that aiming to please. So if you are agreeing to do something, to take on a task, maybe someone's delegating to you, you take it on, or you're volunteering to take on a task because you feel like it's the right thing to do, or no one else in your group ever volunteers, and you're sitting in that awkward silence where if you don't say yes, you think no one else will. So you make a commitment. Maybe it's out of guilt or you feel obligated. This comes down to boundaries as well. And I have grown a ton in this area. I would say this is probably the one that I've grown the most in over the years, in being able to actually say no. At times I try to say not right now instead of no. And be realistic that if the opportunity still has presented itself later and I feel like it's better in alignment with my life, that I might be able to say yes later. But I prefer to say a not right now instead of a strong no. But a good strategy for this, you can start practicing saying no when it's in a low pressure situation. And it can be something small, like if you get an email invite for a meeting where maybe it's the topic of the meeting and it really doesn't apply to your role. There's not going to be anything of value in that meeting and you already have too much on your plate. Again, you're feeling that sense of overwhelm, you're exhausted every day, and you know that if there's anything of value in that meeting for you, it could just be an email. Someone can follow up with an email. Say no. And that's okay to say, I just don't feel as if this is going to be of value. I would love it if someone would make note of something that they think does apply to me, or I'll read the minutes after the meeting. But just small things like that, saying no, will help build your confidence for those situations in which it might be a little bit harder to set a boundary. So just simple practice saying no or not yet for different things. Also, if you start to see lines being blurred between your work and personal life, that is a sign that you're in need of boundaries. And it's interesting because I tend to have the majority of my friends are entrepreneurs. And so obviously they own a business. The business is like their baby. And so there is this really weird blurred line where, you get the notification, you can't help but, my watch buzzes and I want to see, is it important? Is it from a client? Is it going to impact my day on Monday? What is this? Oh, someone just registered for my retreat. That was it earlier. So I know that it is easy to want to check those things. I do know that if I put my device is on do not disturb and I step away for hours or even for a day and I come back, it's usually not an emergency situation, and I have to remind myself of that, that there should be a clear boundary between my work hours and my personal life with my family time. I do need reminders on that. This is a hard one for me. I try to set specific work hours, even if I'm working from home, and start my day knowing like this will be my cutoff. I know my day has been a little bit different recently now with, pick up and drop off at school and the, sitting in the line at school. That has shifted things a little bit. So I've been allowing myself to work a little bit later because I feel like this, hour and a half, 2-hour chunk is taken out of the middle of my day. But set those specific work hours for yourself, no matter where you're working from, and then force yourself to step away, close the laptop, turn off the device or put it on do not disturb. And I think I've mentioned before that you can create exceptions where if you have concerns about friends or family that would have to get in touch with you, you can make exceptions where their calls can come through, and just focus on using that time, that personal time, to recharge so you can be your best. So the blurred line between work and personal life is a definite sign that it's time to start looking at your boundaries. So before I go any further, I think that it's a great time to just stop and allow yourself to reflect for a second on your current boundaries. So are you feeling overwhelmed frequently by the level of commitments that you've made? Do you have trouble saying no to a request, even though you know it's not something you want to do? You still feel like you would feel guilty if you said no, or people will think that you're not being helpful. Again, that you might be selfish if you say no. So are you having trouble saying no when people are requesting things from you? Are you clear about your priorities? Or do you find yourself drifting from one task to another and not really being intentional about it? I have this conversation all the time. I spent a lot of hours last week in one-on-one disc debrief sessions. And there was a tendency for a lot of people to postpone the unpleasant. And so we had a lot of talk about their priorities, how we're defining their priorities based on urgency and importance, and doing those things first that need to get done, not just the things that they like first. So are you going and drifting from one task to another and you're not able to even set clear boundaries for yourself and knowing how you could structure your day to be more effective in your job? So those are just a couple of things I want you to think about. I do encourage you to take some time each day, first thing in the morning, to plan your day with greater intentionality and consider your top 3 priorities. Mindful focus users, we call this the big 3. So those 3 major tasks that you intend to complete that day, they have to be done before you can go down to all these small little tasks just to check them off. These are the 3 most important things. I say to do it in the morning to plan out your day intentionally. However, I usually do it the day before. So at the end of the day, when things are top of mind for me and I know where I'm leaving off, I can set those clear priorities for the next day and I don't have to question where I was when I come in the next morning. So any tasks outside of those 3 priorities may need to be scheduled for a different time. They might need to be delegated, postponed to a later date. I know I recently, for my digital task list, where I've mentioned that I do a master list for my tasks, and then transfer just the ones for that day over to my paper planner, my full focus planner. I recently shifted from using my Excel spreadsheet where, I created a system that really worked for me, but I shifted to using Monday, so monday.com, and it is allowing me to, have have a list associated with myself and categorized based on project. I have a spot on there for Erica, a spot there for Matt. And I'm able to assign tasks. They can assign stuff to me. But I love that because it allows me to really sort and filter based on, am I looking at deadlines? Am I looking at priorities? Am I looking at it by project? What's the next step on this project? And it really allows you to filter in so many different ways to meet your needs. So consider looking at the way in which you plan out your day and figure out if there's something you can do to be more intentional. So that's just what I wanted you to stop and reflect on for a moment. I encourage you to spend more time after the episode reflecting on this as well. So let's talk a little bit now about how to establish some healthy boundaries. I want to give you some steps that you can actually go through to start putting some into place. You guys know that I talk about core values a lot because I do feel like it is important that we identify those for our life and make sure things that we're doing are in alignment. So the boundaries that you create should align with what matters most to you. So if you're valuing family, and family time is important to you, then create boundaries that protect that family time. Maybe you are valuing personal growth right now. Create boundaries that allow you to set aside time to do some reading or attend a conference or whatever it may be that allows you to spend time just on your growth, not focused on other things. So identifying your values will help you to make more well-informed decisions about where you need boundaries in your life. So if you have not gone through a core value identification exercise, I know I've brought it up before. I wish I could tell you off the top of my head what episode it was mentioned in. I believe it was one of the first 5 episodes because I think it was in a solo one. But I definitely have core value resources, so reach out if you need anything in support of identifying your values, defining them, turning them into actionable behaviors, all of that, because this is where boundaries begin. So don't try to start setting boundaries without analyzing your values first. So just an example here, if health is a core value, you might set a boundary about leaving work on time to get to the gym. That's a big one. So people can get wrapped up in, I just want to finish this last thing before I leave work. And then all of a sudden you've cut into your evening and now I have to make a choice. Do I eat a proper dinner tonight or do I go to the gym tonight? Which is more important? Well, if you had set a boundary for yourself and you knew no matter where you were on your tasks and commitments for that day, you were leaving at this time because your health is a priority and you need to go to the gym, you've made a commitment to yourself, then you will do it, right? Or if family is a priority for you, you might set a boundary around dinner time being a phone-free time. So are you leaving your phones elsewhere and sitting down at the dinner table? Who still does that? We still try to do that every time we're having a meal. We have a couple of exceptions. Maybe we'll sit at the island or something. But I love to still sit down and have dinner as a family. And I actually have to be reminded about it being phone-free time because I'll put it off to the side. And if I hear it vibrate, it's an automatic reaction that I want to pick it up and see what the notification is. So again, you might want to put it on Do Not Disturb or something, but actually I know someone that attended the Young Professional Group through the Top of Virginia Regional Chamber. He had shared that he's really good about when he gets home from work, putting it on Do Not Disturb. And I think he even said, I might be making this up, but I thought he said he put it on like top of the fridge or something. And it was just family time. And he knew that the most important people were in that room with him and everything else could wait. So what a great boundary. So number 1, we're looking at those values and identifying what boundaries we need that align with your values. Okay, then we have to communicate those boundaries with other people. And that can be a problem. So I know that this was hard for me because I can create the boundary in my mind. But once I need to hold to the boundaries that I've created, and I need to share those with others so that they can help protect that time or that boundary, that's when it became a problem for me, because you want others to understand what your needs are. You want them to understand maybe you're making a shift in your life, and you're asking that they respect that shift as you're communicating the new boundaries that you've set. They might not agree with it because it might be impacting their access to you. I know I've mentioned that with my schedule and my calendar, shifting to really protecting my day and knowing that I can't sit in one-to-ones all day. I have one relationship building time slot per day, and after that is filled, I cannot do it any other time that day, because otherwise I will not get my work done, and then I'll have to work in the evening, and then I have no family time. So make sure that the people who are around you are aware of these boundaries that you're setting. You can communicate them in a very respectful way, while being assertive and being clear that it's not up for discussion. This is a decision you've made for your life, and you're hoping that they can respect those boundaries and that they understand the needs that you have. Who knows? You might even motivate them to also create some boundaries for themselves. So, thinking through examples of this, how can I communicate a boundary? If someone asks you to do something and you don't have time for it, instead of saying I don't have time for it, maybe you say, I have a project deadline today. I'd love to help at another time. I'd love to help tomorrow, or let's get you on the schedule for such and such a date. For me, if someone reaches out and says, hey, I'd love to have lunch with you. I think I've mentioned on here before that I share that I value your friendship and I would love to drop everything and have lunch with you today, but my next available lunch isn't until blank. And I think that it's important to reinforce it's not that I don't value you, it's not that I don't want to, but in order for me to achieve the goals I have for myself, this is how it stands. So you are a priority and we can do that. It's just not a today thing. So being clear in your communication really does create this trust and respect between you. I think that it's important that even if it's uncomfortable, that you allow yourself to push through that and start somewhere. So if you're new to setting boundaries, do start small. I mentioned that earlier. The things that are a little less intimidating, maybe before moving on to bigger challenges that you're facing. I get requests a lot now to, serve on different boards, volunteer in different capacities. And I actually, people may find this funny, but I have coded on my calendar in red the time in which I am in service mode. So I am doing something that is just of service, whether it's time, whatever it is. So that might be boards that I'm serving on. That might be when I'm out doing stuff in the community for the chamber as an ambassador. I consider that service to the chamber. So anything like that is coded in red, and I have to pay attention to, okay, Sierra, you're not fulfilling your commitments and you have all this service on your calendar. It's great. It feels good, right? But what is that doing? It's creating so much stress during your week or during your weekend, or it's putting stress on the family because they're not spending time with you. So consider things like that. I thought that was intimidating to start saying no to volunteering because I didn't want people to think that I didn't care and that I didn't want to give back. Of course, you're not going to rattle off like, oh, I'd love to do that, but I already serve on this board and that board and this board and I volunteer here. And you're not going to do that. So I think it's just important to say I'm really looking at how I'm using my time. And I do have time set aside for service, but it's really filled right now. It can be gentle. That was a big one for me to get over. But start there, start small. Another one that I often hear is people say they just don't have any time for themselves. And maybe it's a hobby that you have. A lot of times I hear whether it's playing an instrument or crocheting or whatever, reading, just figure out a small amount of time, start small and block it out and set it aside for yourself in the time of day that makes the most sense for you. And just gradually implement these changes. And over time, it will get easier and easier to really plan your day for yourself first and then fill in the other things around. I really love helping people build their ideal day or ideal week in a way where we're crafting it, where they're putting the things that align with their values and what's most important to them first on the schedule, and then they're filling in everything else around it. And interestingly enough, I tend to fill the schedule first with everything but work. And then we look and we say, okay, how much time is left for work? And it blows my mind how every single time it's like, oh, I still have 8 hours for work. But I preloaded it with my stuff and I was able to focus on me first and get in my gym time, my walk, my Bible study, whatever it is, my sitting on the couch and relaxing, and I still have time for 8 hours of work. Yes, but a lot of people do it in reverse and work first, and then work carries over into your personal time, then you're exhausted and you have nothing left. So maybe you can reverse the order of the way that you plan that. But start gradually. You're not going to change it overnight. So just be intentional. Also think about, as a leader, if you are leading a team, consider how you might be able to delegate. If you're a business owner, consider how you could outsource. Look at the tasks that you are currently doing. I even have it's a 15-minute miracle sheet where I tend to have clients track for a week or 2 weeks at a time in 15-minute increments, every single thing that they do and how long they spend on it, so that we can look at how many of those things are really like in their area of genius that they have to be doing, should be doing, enjoy doing, versus those that could be delegated to someone else or outsourced to another company to support with. So we can remove the things that don't have to be there and really can chunk and prioritize their time. So I know if you're feeling pressured to handling everything yourself, everybody's felt that at some point. Learning to delegate is essential when it comes to setting boundaries and being effective in modeling this for others. So if you are delegating, you're not just protecting your time, but you're also empowering your team. You're helping them to develop skills and grow so they can continue to move up in their professional career, maybe even move into that leadership role later. So think about those things that you can pass on that are going to help them develop a new skill set, or they're already capable, but you're just not utilizing them in the way that you could. So again, think about delegating and outsourcing those things to create some boundaries for yourself as well. As you're setting boundaries as a leader, remember everybody's watching, right? You are someone that may be looked up to, you're modeling behavior, you're setting example. So by prioritizing your own boundaries, you're going to encourage your team members to follow suit. So if you don't want your team working after hours, which you should not, because you should want them to get their rest and come back and be refreshed so they can give their best. So you don't actually want them working after hours. So if you don't, Make sure you're not sending them emails after hours. Maybe you can still send them, but schedule send so they're coming during business hours. Whatever you need to do, but that is an example of a behavior where you're modeling for them that it's okay to work late at night, and may even make them feel pressured to be working after hours. So you're setting that tone for what's acceptable. So keep in mind, as simple as the time at which you are sending an email can be sending a message. And I always have to work on that too, because I will pop onto my computer and set aside some time to get things done. And I do have to stop and think before I hit send what that person is going to think about the time that I was sending it. And then thinking about office hours. So a lot of times I hear about, people's preference to, I want to have an open door policy. That does not mean that you are available at all times. That is not at all what open door policy means. You can set aside office hours for your team. You can designate what hours people can drop in and chat, ask questions, whatever they need to do. But set aside time for that. Make it structured. It does not literally mean an open door at all times where people can come in and out. That would be so distracting for me. I would never be able to survive that. I think I might have said before, but as a teacher, I would actually turn the lights out and lock my door during lunch. People would think that I was out having lunch somewhere, but I would be back in the back eating my lunch with the lights out so no one would come in and bother me, because I needed to protect my time. It was my very short break, from making decisions and, responding to questions. And I loved that time. So set aside some time for your team, and then make sure you have designated time for yourself that is do not disturb time. I said sign because I was just looking at do not disturb signs over the last week for a client who is working on for desks and doors and all of that sort of stuff. Being able to put when it's do not disturb versus you're open to, chatting, answering questions, whatever it may be. One of my clients has a really cool one that you put up on the door, and it's like a wheel, and you can spin it to whether you're out of office, at lunch, available, do not disturb, like all these options. So there are really cool things out there now too that can be a visual reminder to people that, this is time where you're available and this is time where you're off limits, because you do need that as well. All right, there are a lot of challenges that come along with maintaining boundaries. So you can set them all day, but what are you going to do when you get pushback or you start to feel guilty? So when you start setting boundaries, you're probably going to get resistance. I know I did, especially having had no boundaries up until that point. If people are used to you always being available to them, for example, when we're talking about time boundaries, it's important that, again, you share that message, but stay consistent. Even if they're resisting, stay consistent. Just kindly but firmly remind them of the boundary that you've set, and just tell them how important it is that they respect that boundary and support you in this. So be open about it, but hold firm. You're going to get pushback, and you might feel guilt. Even if someone didn't necessarily say something to you, you might still feel guilty for saying no, especially if you're used to people pleasing. But this is key. If you take one thing away from this episode, I think that this is the most important thing. Remind yourself that by saying no to something that isn't aligned with your priorities, your values, your purpose, it allows you to say yes to what truly matters. So again, when you say no to something that isn't in alignment, it allows you to say yes to the other things that do matter. So don't just say yes to everything, because then when it comes time to take something on that is in alignment and you don't have space for it, then it's going to be disappointing. So protect your energy for the things that deserve your energy and attention. Don't feel guilty for saying no. It's amazing once you get to the point where you feel more comfortable with that. I mentioned, if people are pushing you to kind of go back into your old ways and they're resisting, it's going to be easy for you to fall back into your old ways as well. Just try and stay as consistent as possible. You might even create a list of non-negotiables. When a request comes in for something, check against the list. If it's in conflict with the list, then it's a clear indicator to say no. So for example, when I said to Erica, here is my ideal week, I gave her a copy of it. And I said, this is how many client appointments I'm willing to take on in a day, equaling this many hours. This is my minimum amount of admin time I need every day to be able to get the work done to support the clients that I have. This is the amount of time that I can spend in a day on relationship building, and so on, right? Once I gave that to her and I was clear, and this is the way in which I want to function and live, she has become a great protector of my boundaries. So, once she sees that I've hit my limit on client time for a day, she looks at the next day. It's become so clear of when to say no to something because I took the time to identify my non-negotiables. This is absolutely what I have to have in order to be successful. So that has been very helpful. And understand that boundaries are going to change over time. You're not going to create a boundary now that's going to serve you forever. So evaluate your boundaries quarterly. I think that's a great time to do it. I'm of a quarterly rotation because that's when I switch out my full focus planners every quarter. So it's a great time to stop and evaluate the boundaries you have. Are they still serving you well? Do you need to adjust them in any way? It's going to help you make sure that the boundaries are aligned with your current goals and needs. And if there's been a shift in priority, you can shift those boundaries. But don't forget, if you're changing boundaries, then you need to make sure that you're communicating those changes to the people that are around you most, because they're going to see this as an inconsistency. So make sure you let them know that you have decided to make a change and this is what the new boundary is. So just keep that in mind as well. So I've talked about the challenges that you face when starting to put boundaries in place, but I want to flip that now and think about all of the wonderful opportunities that come out of having boundaries, the positive impact that it's going to have on your life. And some of this might sound like common sense, but I do want to point it out so that you think about, as hard as it is to set a boundary, it's worth all of these things. You are going to be more likely to be able to focus on the tasks, the high impact tasks that matter most, and get caught up on all of your work rather than being distracted. So this is going to increase your productivity. It's going to increase your ability to focus. So by blocking off time in your calendar for this deeper work, you're going to get better results. It's going to be less stressful. You're going to make the most of your time rather than feeling like you're constantly trying to multitask and bounce from one thing to another. So increased productivity and focus is a massive positive impact of having boundaries. You're also going to improve relationships, and this might sound a little counterintuitive because you have now set boundaries that maybe you didn't have before, and people might be a little unsure of how to take that. Maybe they feel like they're not as much of a priority as they have been for you, whatever that may be. But the reason it can create healthier relationships is because you now have set clear expectations, and it can prevent getting to a point of resentment. So people are going to respect your boundaries if you're clear and consistent about them. You're improving communication because people know where the limits are. I know that there were plenty of times in the past where I would be resentful of the people in my life that I felt like were pushing me to commit to things that I didn't want to do, but I was saying yes to them. So I was to blame, not them. But I had gotten to a point where I was feeling that way. So it can lead to a healthier relationship and making sure you have the right people around you, because let me say this. If you are putting boundaries in place and people continue to try and push you outside of those boundaries and will not respect them, are they the people that you want to be around you? Are they the people you want to have in your circle or in your life? Because I'm pretty sure the people you want to have in your life are the people that are going to respect the boundaries you put in place, because they care about you, they care about your well-being, and if you have identified that this is important to you, it should be important to them as well. So keep that in mind when considering your relationships. Setting boundaries also is going to help prevent that burnout. It's going to help you to have the energy to continue to lead effectively in the long run. You're going to be able to take better care of yourself over time. You're creating that space for self-care so you can be more effective and not running on empty all the time. You can be present as a leader. So I know I've covered a lot in this time with you today thinking about boundaries, and we didn't get into as much of the physical and emotional. I tend to go back to the protecting of your time, because when you protect your time, you also get to the point of protecting the physical and emotional boundaries when it comes to your values. If all of your boundaries are based off of values, then all of those categories are covered. So keep in mind, boundaries are crucial no matter where you are in life. And remember, the purpose of this podcast is to reinforce that leadership skills really do apply to everyday life, no matter where you are, no matter how you're leading. If you're leading your family, in your home, if you're leading a team, boundaries are important. They're going to lead to healthier relationships, improved productivity, and a more balanced life. So it's not about shutting people out. It's about making sure you have enough energy and space to show up fully for the people and things that matter most. So my challenge to you, the branching out challenge for this week is set a new boundary this week. It could be related to work, family, it can be related to anything, but sit down and consider, what is an area of my life in which I have not been giving it the time and attention that it needs? Again, it's your values. What do I value that isn't getting my attention right now? And what boundary do I need to have in place in order to protect that? That is the challenge for this week, and I always encourage you to reach out and share with us what your takeaways are from these episodes, whether it's on social media. If you want to shoot us an email at info@branchingoutpodcast.com. We want to hear from you. We want to know that you're out there listening. Please share this episode with someone that you feel would benefit from hearing it. We encourage you to subscribe so you get notifications when these episodes drop on Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time. So thank you so much for sticking through to the end of this episode. I hope you learned something about the importance of setting boundaries, and maybe you can set a new one this week for yourself. All right, until next time, keep branching out.